You get to go back to your unmarried self, never been in a committed relationship. You get to put your hands on your own shoulders and say, here's the one piece of advice you really need to know about relationships. What would you say to your unmarried self? Welcome to the Kickass Couples Podcast. This is the place where we help committed couples who want to level up their marriage experience newfound clarity, hope, and confidence. We're Matthew and Kim, co-hosts and husband and wife.
In 26 years together, we've seen a lot and never thought it could be as good as it is right now. We're here to help you successfully navigate the messy, dirty, and wonderful world of marriage.
We believe all couples deserve and are capable of experiencing an extraordinary and fulfilling marriage. And each week, we're bringing you life lessons from real-life successful couples to help you grow and strengthen your relationship.
We'll get started right after this message.
If you want to learn how to experience the best, most fulfilling year of your marriage, we invite you to order Matthew's new book, Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex. You can get it at Amazon.com or visit Matthew's website, www.matthewphoffman.com. Again, that's Amazon.com or www.matthewphoffman.com. And now, back to the show.
Scott and Nancy are a dynamic duo who both teach and model adventure dating and relationship coaching. They have become known for their unique approach of using adventure therapy. They help people love themselves first, embrace adventure, and live life to the fullest. Scott and Nancy are also keynote speakers and have been featured in the List TV, Authority Magazine, and Wander Magazine. Multiple failed relationships finally brought them together, and they have embraced a unique lifestyle ever since. After Scott's tragic accidental work explosion, they have come together to create innovative tools and strategies to maintain relationships that they now share with others today. Prior to meeting Nancy, Scott worked as an independent contractor in the film industry for 25 plus years for companies like Warner Brothers, Disney, Netflix, and HBO. With over 20 years of experience as a rescue climber and rock climbing gym owner, he guided numerous groups and individuals on thrilling, breathtaking climbing adventures, which led him to develop an understanding of adventure therapy, which is now incorporated into their coaching programs today. Nancy, the youngest of 5 sisters, was raised in a female-dominant household. Her parents were forward-thinking business owners who taught her to prioritize her happiness first. At 26, she launched her first business, a wedding planning company. She later expanded her business model to include IHLE handbags and Scott and Nancy Consulting, LLC, their adventure and life coaching company. We're glad you've chosen to come along for the ride and learn from this inspiring couple who found a way to navigate the highs and lows of love together. Welcome back to the Kickass Couples Podcast. We are excited to be with an incredibly adventurous and dynamic couple with us today. We want to welcome to the podcast Scott and Nancy Kiesling. So glad you guys could be with us today.
Thank you, guys. We are so excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We are looking forward to our conversation.
That's great.
Same. And we are going to come right out of the gate asking our very first question, favorite question. And that is, what do you believe, Scott, that makes you kick ass in your relationship, right?
In our relationship?
That's
in
right.
your relationship, what makes you kick ass, the two of you?
I think what makes us a kick-ass duo is the fact that we both really live not only presently, but adventurously. And we both sort of have this adventurous mindset separately and together. And really getting to share that and show people the possibilities around adventurous mindset and what it can do for a relationship, I think is what.
Like we don't only have it with each other, but then we both really want to share that with other people and take other people into that world too. So, yeah.
Fun and humor is one of our pillars, one of our 14 pillars that we believe it takes to make or to have a successful relationship. And so I love hearing you say that because it is an important factor in relationships. And I also feel like it's one that gets missed sometimes, right? We get so busy with life and we're living in this vortex and we forget to have fun and to be adventurous with one another.
So I want to
Absolutely.
ask you for I'm going to play the novice. I've never heard the term adventurous mindset. So would you all mind giving us kind of a layperson's definition of what is an adventurous mindset?
Sure. So, most people, when they think of adventure, they think of like thrills and rappelling down waterfalls or jumping out of an airplane. And as fun as that is, and we do all of that, the idea around adventurous mindset is more of the openness of your mind. And it's about the curiosity and resilience of playing this game of life and being on this journey. And at its core, I would say an adventurous mindset is about possibility. Uh, and
Well, and stepping through your fears. For some people, adventure is saying hi to somebody, right? For some people, adventure is getting out of bed, right? So it's not always these big thrills when people hear the word adventure. So learning how to live that way and step through what normally holds people back.
Love that. Well, I think you guys both did a great job of defining that. And I think that we're going to get into a lot of things about adventure and mindset. But one of the things we love to do when we have opportunity to speak to great couples is say, what did love look like growing up? And so, Nancy, we say around here that, grandpa's in everybody's bones, right? And the people that raised us had a lot of influence on what we like, what we dislike, how we relate, not only to everybody else, but to our partner and spouse. So go ahead, Nancy, let me know, thinking back, what did love look like for you in your family situation when you were growing up?
I had a very loving family. Like it was what we all see in the movies, in my opinion. It was, my parents were very supportive of all of us kids. Uh, we were shown that we were put first all the time, before them, before anything else. We were, really given that support that we could do anything and put, as long as we put our mind and our heart into it. So we were really supported, and that equaled love for us, and being put as a priority equaled love for me, and I think for my sisters as well. But yeah, it was a very loving household. It was, yeah, love was big. I guess that's the biggest thing I could explain for it.
Do you have some examples that you can share of how your parents express love to each other?
Yeah, to each other. So, we had a lot of tradition. We had, family time was big. Everything was, we were always together as a family, of doing things together as a family. So, my parents, they were best friends. They really had a wonderful friendship. They were a support system for one another. So coming home to each other after their days to talk about what happened, struggles they had, but to support one another and how to overcome something or do better, or just to, vent and get it off their chest. They were always there for each other for that. Um, so I think that communication that I got to see between them, was really big, and understanding that that support system in a relationship is really important.
Sure. And I have to, you said a magic buzzword for Kick-Ass Couples Nation, and that's prioritization or priority.
Mhm.
We're firm believers. Our whole platform is really built on the idea that most relationship issues can be solved if each partner has the correct prioritization of their spouse or their partner in the relationship. And I think that I appreciate you saying that. How about you, Scott? What did love look like growing up for you, or how was that modeled or not modeled, and how did you experience that when you were coming up?
yeah, very different than Nancy. Uh, I would say the polar opposite, uh, in my childhood, and so my lessons were very, very hard. There was no room to be an individual, like to be who you authentically were. It was more to be who you were supposed to be as this human, as this son, as this person, and the the room for error was very small. And that's one of the things that I truly love about my journey, and I wouldn't change it for the world, because if I didn't have the father and the mother that I had, my son wouldn't be the man that he is today. And what I mean by that is changing the dynamic of my family and what that love looked like and how it was modeled. I believe is my biggest strength, superpower that I've ever achievement that I've ever had. So it was modeled to me in such a way that every bit of it was something I didn't want to do. And that modeling was so perfect for my life, my journey, and to be able to pass something on different.
That sounds like not only a radical difference, but a lot of incredible challenges to start out with. So, how share with us, if you're comfortable to do so, how did you personally navigate that from the time that that started happening to you, and then kind of the B part of that question would be, what did you and Nancy need to do relative to those issues in your relationship, so that you guys could get on the same footing or have some kind of better understanding as well?
Yeah. Well, I'll touch on the latter part first. What Nancy and I had to do, we did separately. We did work on ourselves to overcome those pieces that normally people bring into a relationship. So for me, there were several different ways that I dealt with that experience of growing up in the environment that I did. And my go-to was drugs and alcohol. That was sort of the go-to of how to not feel the feelings, not be the person I wanted to be, but be this other shell of a person. And as most people know, the deeper you get into that life, the closer you come to death, which is what I had hoped for a long time. And so my realization came one day standing on top of a 7-story building with one foot off. And at that moment, I decided that I wouldn't live any of that old story anymore. And I began to find mentors, read books, travel the world, like you name it, I did it. And I spent basically 3.5 years, a little bit longer in the beginning of my journey, just learning about me and how I could keep myself accountable for and really take responsibility for who I was up until that point. And then really the mentors and learning who I wanted to become for that person that I wanted to be with forever, and didn't want to be the guy in the bar or the guy running around or the guy not paying attention, but actually be invested and committed. And I know committed is one of your pillars. Having that commitment truly from a place of committed to self, not other.
Yeah.
That's huge. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. And I think it gives a lot of hope to other people who find themselves maybe in that same place, right? You made a decision in that moment. And the hope is that people can hear your story and learn and grow from it. And you talked about commitment, which is a great segue into our next question. And that is, I'll start with you, Nancy. How does commitment show up in your relationship? What does commitment between you and Scott look like?
So I would say, commitment for us is really, where he goes, I go, where I go, he goes. We are in this and that's figuratively and literally. Life is going to take you on a journey, right? It's not always going to be unicorns and rainbows. So even when things get tough and we go through struggle, we're going to be there by each other's side to help the other through it, or help each other through it. And then, of course, all the fun and good times too of actually going places. But Scott had an accident about 5 years ago that was a real, kind of turnaround to our relationship for a long time. But you hear a lot of stories of tragedy happening in relationships and people separating because of it, right? So really learning how we could both grow through that and be with each other through that is my version of commitment, to our relationship. And that extends in every direction outside of that.
Sure. And do you have anything that you might add to that, Scott?
Probably. No, I think, I said it a minute ago, I think for me, the commitment comes back to me and being committed to a life of joy and opportunity as opposed to struggle and victim and challenge. And really, when I live that for me, it automatically creates a space for us to live that together.
Yeah, that
And
makes me think of our vow of the,
well,
yeah, like we always said to each other, like, I'll be my best me for you and you be your best you for me, and vice versa. But we always come first individually, not only so you're the best version for you, but it reflects on the relationship. I take care of me for me, but also you,
right.
and
And I
vice
take care of
versa.
me for me, but also for her.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that to me is commitment, and
Yeah.
and discipline, and all of that kind of rolled in.
Are you tired of feeling like you're living with a roommate instead of a lover? Do you miss the days when you were completely into each other, intellectually, emotionally, and physically? The truth is, many couples are struggling behind closed doors. Putting on a brave face for the rest of the world is exhausting. If you want to get back your joy, return to thriving, and take pleasure in your marriage, then Kickass Couples Coaching and Matthew P. Hoffman are here to help. Join us alone or with your partner and start taking steps towards overcoming the pain-filled obstacles and improving your relationship right now. For a limited time, we're offering a free relationship assessment call. Go to MatthewPHoffman.com/coaching to book your free call now so you can start making real changes in your most important relationship today.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, it's interesting because when we're talking about commitment, and we talk a lot about self-care as well, the old oxygen mask analogy on the airplane, right? So what is it, what level, how do you determine the difference between I'm taking care of myself so I can be there for you versus I'm being a little selfish and self-indulgent and doing what I want instead of what's best for the relationship? How do you all navigate that? Or what do you do to make sure that is indeed self-care and doesn't lead to selfish care
Yeah.
in your relationship? Or what are your thoughts about that?
No, and that's a really good point, because our mind chatter can get in the way and call ourselves selfish, right? When we're taking that time and when we're first learning to take that time for ourselves. Because I think a lot of people are kind of taught that self-care and taking time for self is selfish. So it's a challenge to step through and start incorporating into your life if you don't normally do that. And that was me, right? Like I said earlier, my parents always put us first, right? So they were not selfish, but they also did not do a lot of self-care. When I look back, it was everyone else first. So learning that this was a better way and something I could incorporate for myself, I felt very guilty at first of taking time for myself. But open communication with Scott is what allows me to know, is this too much? Am I, like when I feel that guilt, when I feel like maybe I'm taking a little too much time, really communicating that instead of living inside my head of these stories that I'm telling myself, which 99% of the time are false, right? letting that out of the bag and talking to him about it, of like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Am I crazy, or is this right? Right. And he'll let me know, like, maybe I'm feeling, maybe you're a little too much, or I'm feeling neglected right now, or, no, that's totally fine. Go do it. But that open communication allows us to know that boundary of what's good for both of us.
Well, and I would just add to that it's really what you hold inside, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't communicate about. And then what is your belief around it? Mm-hmm. So we believe that self-care is the most important thing in our relationship, right? Then other things come into play. So really having the belief around the idea of keeping myself healthy for Nancy. And then we also have other rituals, right? Self-care is not the only one. We have marriage maintenance, mm-hmm. right? So marriage maintenance is the balance of self-care. And in marriage maintenance, we make sure that we have date night. Mm-hmm. We make sure that we have intimate conversation. We make sure that we bring up stories about our week that maybe we didn't share. Mm-hmm. That balances that out, where there's not many times we have the conversation that Nancy was alluding to a minute ago. Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of marriage maintenance. And I think people forget how important it is to incorporate that into your relationship. Again, we're busy and we're kind of doing our thing, and we forget to make time for each other. We forget to, like you speak about, be adventurous together. We forget to do all these things. And that is a form of maintenance for our marriage. And so I'm grateful that you're sharing that with our listeners. You touched a little bit about communication, or touched a little bit on it. And I'm curious to hear about your communication style and how you have learned to communicate these things with each other. Does it come easily? Is it something that had to be learned? Share with me a little bit about how you do that.
Yeah, so it was definitely, for me, it was definitely learned.
Me too.
Because early on in my relationship journeys, I did not have good communication skills. Right? So it's absolutely learned. And anyone, if I can learn how to communicate effectively with the opposite sex and even with the same sex, anybody can do it. What I say is that it's practice, right? We can't talk about having good communication skills or go, I want to get better communication skills. The only way to do it is to practice. And to go back to one piece of your question there, yes, it's uncomfortable in the beginning, mm-hmm. right? Where as humans, we're so used to, patterned or habited to like put up walls and not be vulnerable and not have these in-depth conversations. Well, you can have more intimacy in a conversation that will lead to other intimacy, mm-hmm. right? Than the intimacy itself. Mm-hmm. And that level of communication only comes with practice. It only comes with understanding yourself and where you hold back and becoming vulnerable in that.
Yeah,
sure.
So in your learning journey, Scott, as you talk about that, what was the turning point, or what was the key thing, or what was the thing that put you from I'm climbing the hill and I'm lousy to, okay, I kind of get it and I'm doing better and I'm now not a master. None of us are perfect. I screw up every day, more than once. But and she's laughing. So yeah, it's true. But tell me about a turning point, in other words, or the one thing, or once I learned this, things began to change. What, can you remember what that was, or can you share something from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the film industry for 30 years, and I watch great, incredible actors and directors build characters. And I started to look at my own character and why I communicated the way that I did. And there are very clear reasons when I connect the dots going backwards. I communicated the way I did because of the experiences I had. and what was modeled and all of that and what I believed, right? Our beliefs are a huge part of our communication, right? And the way that we communicate with other humans. And so as I started to, again, get coaches and mentors and really dive into the character who I was and the character who I wanted to become, and what was the gap, right? What did I have to learn? Who did I have to become? And so I would say if I had to narrow it down to the one skill that was like, oh, this is it, it's awareness. It's being aware that when somebody else was speaking, I was in my head forming an opinion, forming a sentence, waiting for my turn to talk. Instead, with awareness and being present, I can actually hear without the filters of my old experiences. So if I can hear without the filters of my old experiences, I can see somebody else's perception as a possibility. Again, I go back to the adventurous mindset. It's about possibility. Is it possible that in Nancy's reality, XYZ is this thing? Well, of course, in her perspective, in her reality, because she's speaking it, of course it's something. So in that awareness, in that seeing that other perspective, I can go, okay, so what is creating this experience, this opportunity for growth for us, and being open enough to see it for what it is, not what I believe it should be.
Big difference.
So I hear you saying you're slowing down, you are truly listening, and you're giving the person who's speaking an opportunity to really say what they need to say, and you're just trying to take it all in and process it really without forming an opinion, though.
Yeah, and more importantly, giving them an opportunity to be heard, not to speak, right? The more we give people the opportunity to speak, the less they feel heard, the louder they speak. The more I give her the opportunity, or anyone, the opportunity to be heard, really heard, from a presence, from in this experience with you, and really understand why it is that we're here, good, bad, and different, whatever that experience is, why are we here? And what opportunity are we being given in this moment to grow?
Well, and that's what it really does for the other person in the relationship, is you do feel heard, right? Instead of me saying something and him just regurgitating what he felt and what he thinks and not taking into account, well, I hear what you're saying and I understand that. Most times in the arguments, we don't hear each other because we're just focused on, but you're not hearing me. This is how I feel. Instead of actually listening and taking away the need to be right, the need for you to speak at that moment, and just really take in what the other person is saying and kind of put everything down for a minute, right? Doesn't mean that we can't pick it back up and go, well, can you just see my side for a minute? But in that moment, we're so quick on, you have to see my side right now, rather than let me see yours. So it's more of, instead of the game of who's right, it's the game of who's going to put their bag down first and listen. And that really opens it up to understand one another in a totally different way.
We use very intentional language, which again has taken practice. So we use very intentional I language, right? I am feeling, I am in this place, not you have made me, or you didn't, or you always, or you never, right?
Sure. But this is my truth. This is my version. This is what I'm hearing here and here.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
when we receive that openly, the walls drop. The argument isn't an argument. It's a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, there's such a huge desire. I think all of us have a desire. Maybe we can't always put our finger on it, but we want to be understood. And that doesn't accepted for what you believe or don't believe. It doesn't have to be agreement, and we'll get to that in a moment. But Anything else, Nancy, on communication? That's our second pillar, and you guys have been sharing. Anything else you want to add about communication and what it looks like between the two of you, or how you've been able to create the dance through your communication with each other?
Yeah, communication wasn't easy for me in the sense of really opening up to the things I felt, right? I could talk to you about anything. I would tell people I'm an open book. If you ask me something, I'll tell you. Like, I don't care. But if I had a problem with something, it was a huge struggle for me to bring that up in a relationship. I would talk myself into it's fine. I didn't want to nag them. I didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to create conflict. I didn't want them to think I was like not like me or so many things I would talk myself out of bringing up what I actually was feeling in the relationship or about even small things like, I wish you'd pick your clothes up off the floor and put them away. Like I would just talk myself out of it and do it. So communication, I started to realize it went from those small things to the big things because I would push aside even bigger things, right? So I had to learn that why do you keep putting all this on the side? I would just become silent about that stuff. And all it did was create this divide in my relationship. So I started to realize that and realize that every relationship had this kind of surface based feel and then a divide. So again, it comes back to you. I can't keep blaming everyone else that I'm just dating people who aren't open or I'm not dating people who don't hear me. It had to come back to what am I doing that's creating the same thing in every relationship. So there was a lot of work that had to be done around understanding that. But then when I got into my next relationship, it was practice because I all of a sudden would notice, oh, shoot, there's that thing again. And I want to shut down. I don't want to say something. And really stepping through that to go, no, when you say it, it actually brings the relationship closer and really doing it and then seeing the actual evidence that it does bring the person closer. And I got to play with that. And every time it was, it's work to step through that. Even today, I'll notice that old voice coming up, but I step through it so much faster. Instead of days of holding on to that, it's minutes. But it doesn't mean that those things aren't going to come up for us. But the more we practice it, the more we step through, the easier, like Scott said, it becomes.
So, kind of our third pillar, which is a little bit of the synthesis of commitment and communication, is conflict or problem resolution. And anybody, I think one of the people we talked to one time said, if anybody tells you they never fight, then that's probably just because one of them is giving in and accepting everything else the other person says and does. And watch how long that relationship lasts. And so, inevitably, things come up. And when they do, Scott, I'd love to hear you share, what does conflict resolution look like? How do you guys approach it? How do you work through it? And what could you share that has been the best process for you guys to work through and get beyond those things that may come up?
Yeah, I think the best process is really, I go back to awareness, right? I have a firm belief that with awareness and a pause, we can reduce conflict to a conversation. So, what I mean by that is we all know when we're at that level of argument, of conflict. And to reduce it, we have to have awareness that we're in that place. And it's not your partner's job to go, oh, you're at a 10 again. It's your job to go, okay, I'm bringing the volume up. I'm doing this. So where can I find that awareness in myself? And then take this pause. And in that pause, there's a few things that we can do depending on the conflict, right? If it's, you left some dishes in the sink and it's it's like a 1 on the conflict scale between 0 and 10, then you can have a hug and decide what's going to happen from that point, right? And the 15-second hug drops that conflict from a 1 to a 0. If we're in a conflict and we're at an 8, well, then it might mean in my awareness that, okay, I'm at an 8, I'm going to take a walk. And I'm going to take what we call an awareness walk. I'm going to go and I'm going to be really critically aware and situally of my environment, right? I'm going to have this situational awareness about the cars that pass, the trees I see, the birds, the squirrels. And I'm going to drop the story of the conflict. And again, practice. right? Practice. In the beginning, I could do this like once a month, once a year, maybe. Now I don't have to walk away at all because I've built a system within myself it's like an indicator on your dashboard of your car. When your indicator light comes on that you need oil, you stop and you put oil in it. So when my indicator lights come on, I take a pause and I investigate, like, why am I so aggravated? What has caused this conflict, right? Because let's be honest, conflict comes from resistance, right? You're resisting something within your reality. So what is that? And what is the story that we're telling ourselves around that? And then it's like, okay, where's the truth in it? Now, I am so gosh darn grateful that I have a partner that will play this game with me, because that's what it takes, right? It takes a partner that's willing to go, oh, normally every Thursday we get in a fight about this. Hey, let's take a look at it. Let's drop that 8 to a 6. Let's drop that 6 to a 4. And through that practice, the communication grows because that's where conflict is resolved. In the I feel, right? My shoulders are tense and I feel a knot in my throat, and I am wanting to have a better conversation around you and your friends, you and going out, you and the laundry, you and the dishes, whatever.
Right. So
Well,
it's
and,
your, I mean,
it
I think,
really is like explaining things. A lot of times we get angry because we feel like we're not being heard, right? That's where usually the raising of the voice comes through. But we continue to explain things the same way, right? I feel like in a conversation, whether it's with him, with a coworker, with an employee, with, any sister, sibling, it's my job, if you're not hearing me, okay, you're not hearing me, so let me explain this again in a different way, right? We tend to just hammer down the same conversation, the same phrase of what I'm saying. And then I get frustrated of, you're not hearing me. So I think if I say it louder, maybe you're going to hear it, right? If I say it even louder, right? And we start in this yelling match and both people are doing that and no one hears anything.
Instead, I can say something like, hey, I'm not explaining this well.
Yeah, let me try
and change my approach.
Yeah.
Right? It's like a plane coming into a runway that's full. He has to change his approach. There's no problem. It's not like this dramatic thing. There's a solution. Change the approach.
are you struggling to maintain the emotional and physical intimacy you once shared? Do you feel like you're spending more energy finding fault and tearing your partner down instead of magnifying their good and building them up? Don't worry, you're not alone. Many couples are struggling behind a forced smile and an inauthentic happiness. You feel drained, unheard, and more often than not, unappreciated. The good news is it's not too late to rekindle the flame and strengthen your bond. I'm offering a free relationship assessment call to help you take the first step towards revitalizing your relationship and reaching your own relationship nirvana. Whether you come alone or with your partner, I'm here to help you create the space for a more fulfilling and satisfying relationship. Don't wait any longer. Make the changes you need to thrive. Book your free call today at matthewphoffman.com/coaching. And let's get started on your journey to a kick-ass relationship. Love that.
Yeah, that's great. I want to talk a little bit more about our pillars. And you all have a list in front of you of the 14 pillars. We talked about the first 3, but Nancy, I would love to hear from you first. Is there one of those pillars outside of the first 3 that really resonates with you, and why?
Let me see, looking over. My eyes are going between 4 and 12. So trust and honesty and appreciation. I think appreciation is a big one in our relationship, but also what we help people with. Because again, I think the majority of people live inside a story in their head of what is or isn't happening, and we repeat that, and then we miss what's actually going on in the real world, right? Because we tell ourselves, he doesn't do anything. God, I have to do everything around the house. God, if he would just do this, if he would just do that. And we miss out on all the things they actually are doing, right? And this goes in both ways, and it goes in every facet of our life, work, relationships, whichever. When we're in that story, we miss out. So getting out of that story to actually go, what is happening? Like, my love language is acts of service, right? So all of a sudden, if I'm starting to feel like, God, I feel like I've been doing everything around here lately, I'm telling myself that story. I have to remove myself out of that story and go, look around for a minute, watch him for a day, see what's going on. Is he starting to like slack off and get bored or lazy or get in his own head? Is something going on, right? Or am I in my own head and I'm thinking this and telling myself, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. And 99% of the time, I watch that he is doing all the things that he normally does. And actually, he does a lot of stuff, so I'll remind myself that it's an old pattern that I believe that I have to do everything. And yes, I was in relationships that I had to do everything. So that is a pattern that's within me, but it still comes into my head, but it's not my reality today. So if I don't get out of that, then I'll stay in the story and think that's my reality. So we have to do that. Everyone's got to get out of their head and look at what is really going on here and appreciate the things that people are really doing for us, so we don't feel unappreciated, unloved, not heard.
Not
right?
a priority.
Yeah, all these things that people are actually doing for you. And when you take note of it, sometimes you get surprised.
Yeah, that's an excellent way of putting it. It's a great example. What are some ways that you show your appreciation for Scott?
Let's see, what do I do, dear? Some things that I won't say on radio, but also,
Okay,
I love
ding,
that.
ding, ding, ding,
That's
ding.
right.
And he's smiling, and that's all we got to say. Okay. Something else, though, Nancy. Okay, something else.
No, thanking him for all the things he does do, like letting him know that I really appreciate when I have a lot on my plate, he picks up the rest of things. He'll, make sure that, the laundry's done, the house is clean, that, we're a duo on these things. So really letting him know the things I appreciate. And I think really the words of affirmation are big in that. Yeah, so I think verbally letting him know.
What about for you, Scott? What pillar really stands out to you and resonates with you most?
So I think what keeps jumping out for me is the patience. There was a time in my life where I wasn't patient with people, with anybody. And it really came from the lack of significance in my life. And so to be significant, I was the loudest guy in the room. I was the 0 to 10 sort of person, instead of being the person who could actively listen to what was going on and take a view from what it actually is, not what I want it to be, not what it should be, but what is it really that's happening. And in that process, I have learned patience. I have practiced patience. So again, I go back to I have a 3-step action plan, and it's like I take it in every single step of my life. And patience is one of the places that I utilize this. Awareness of what is going on. What am I saying to myself? Am I in a story, or am I being present? How am I feeling, right? What feeling is coming up? And in that moment, being able to create a pause for me, within me. When I can take that pause and I can look at that truth, then that third step is to take an action different from an old action. Because the only way that I can get a different outcome is to do something different. And so in that pause, in that patient moment, if you will, I get to slow everything down and really look at what the old action that Scott would have taken. Sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time now it doesn't, but in the beginning it did. I would look at, okay, I know I want to do this. Like, we can viscerally feel where we want to go. And I mean, my shoulders are getting tight for those of you that can't see it. Like, we know where we want to go. And in that pause, I can go, okay, hold on. My shoulders are tight. I want to go this direction. Can I make a 1 degree shift? Can I shift that compass 1 degree? Not 10 degrees, not 100 degrees, not 1,000 degrees.
Just a little change.
Just
a
enough
small,
to make
small
it.
adjustment.
Yeah.
And I noticed that in that pause, in that 1 degree shift, in that moment of being patient and present, I got different outcomes that blew my mind, that changed my life.
Yeah, I love
amazing.
when I hear you telling that story and that example. As you look at patients, two things come to mind. One, I don't know if you ever heard of the acronym PBR, not Pabst Blue Ribbon, but pause, breathe, reflect. And someone else that I heard talking used that acronym, and I think it comes down to, if you are familiar with Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about between stimulus and response, there's always a space. And in that space lies our freedom to choose how we are going to react and move on what we've just received. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. And it's wonderful, wonderful advice, because it's being more self-evaluative instead of other evaluative. It's not, the problem isn't out there with somebody. The problems usually lie within, and your examples is a great thing of doing that.
Yeah. And I want our listeners to hear it takes practice.
Yeah.
For some, it doesn't come easy or natural, especially if you've had a history like you have had, Scott. And so taking that space, that moment, that pause, almost like a fork in the road. I can go to the left or I can go to the right. I have a choice, right? And really making the right choice for the both of you.
Yeah.
Not just yourself, but the right choice for the we.
Yeah. Well, and Kimberly, I love that you mentioned that piece of like being patient with yourself, because, you know, even my upbringing and having, you know, the picture perfect upbringing, it doesn't matter. It's the fact of the matter is we've had this pattern for X amount of years. However old you are, where you all of a sudden realize, you know what, I'd rather behave differently in this realm. Doesn't matter what it is. If you just want to listen better, if you want to do something different, you have to understand you've had that pattern for 35 years, 40 years. It's going to take some time to turn the boat around and go the other direction. And we have to be patient in conditioning ourselves in a new way. But most people feel like I should be doing it. I have awareness, so I should just do it. And when you start to understand human behavior and that it takes conditioning, you get much more patient with yourself. And you're like, oh, yeah, of course I just did that because it was my pattern for 35 years. Right. And then we can kind of laugh about it and move in the different direction.
Well, and I love that you utilize the word choice, because the power of choice is one of the absolute superpowers of the human being.
Yeah.
Right. And when we have choice, it turns reaction into action. So choice is such a key.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, you know, even though you came from different backgrounds, as we all do, and you bring different things forward that you have to deal with individually or ultimately collectively, the idea of choice versus victimization is a choice. So if you're going to get out of the pattern, change the routine, have a different destination or a different result, as you were talking about, Scott, I'm going to choose to not be a victim and say, what can I do? Not what should they do? And I think that dynamic is huge in most relationships, because most people who are struggling and can't get out of conflict because they're demanding or waiting for the other person in the party to do the work, for things to be okay, as opposed to, I've got to do my work. And of course, there's circumstances, hey, I've done my work and they just don't want to do anything. That's something else. But I love that idea. And so you guys have had a lot of great experiences individually and collectively. But I want you guys, we're going to put you in a time machine. Nancy, you go in first. You get to go back to your unmarried self, never been in a committed relationship. You get to put your hands on your own shoulders and say, here's the one piece of advice you really need to know about relationships. What would you say to your unmarried self?
I think it would be to, well, I guess that would be all relationships, not so much a committed relationship. But the first thing that comes to mind for me is not caring so much or thinking so much about what other people think, because then you get out of your own self. So I was very concerned with what other people thought of me. So a lot of my behaviors came from that. So, of course, in my romantic relationships, it was always wanting to be liked, because I'd be thinking, well, if I do this, if I, act my authentic self, basically, if I do what I initially felt, then they might not like me because I, thought that might be stupid or whatever. So it starts to gear you to really never be your true self, because you're just doing things out of the hope that someone's going to continue to like you. So I think that would be the biggest piece of advice, is just to be you and stop thinking that people aren't going to like you by being you.
Love it. Love it. How about you, Scott? What would you say to your unmarried self? Here's the one thing you've got to know to get the most success in relationship in your life.
Yeah, authenticity came up first, but Nancy stole it. So the second piece that comes up for me is to learn from others. Just because you're living from the vehicle that you were modeled to be, or the character that you were modeled to be, that doesn't mean that other relationships don't exist. A lot of us and a lot of our clients, we've heard this from hundreds of clients, that they didn't realize that there were other types of relationships than the ones that they had always been in. So whether that was abusive or a cheater or a narcissist or a non-communicator, or they didn't realize that not everybody's relationship had a piece of this in it. And I feel like understanding and really learning from others about relationships would have been the most important for my 13-year-old self, to understand that it can be different. This isn't what love looks like.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I love talking about intimacy within a relationship, because there are so many different kinds of intimacy. As we all know, there are spiritual, intellectual, emotional, sexual. And so, what have you done to keep the intimacy alive and well in your relationship over time?
So the number one thing for me is really keeping the adventure within it. And again, that can mean a lot of things.
Play.
Play. And that is not only getting out in nature and getting our dopamine that way, but actually having those deep conversations.
Well, I think that's, when we first met, what I remember most, because you just listed all the different kinds of intimacy, the spiritual intimacy I remember feeling was this, and I can see it clear as day. I remember pulling up and he was waiting at the restaurant. We were friends and we were going to have dinner. And it was this feeling of like, I hadn't seen this person in years. And I was so excited to sit and chat for hours. And I was like, I remember being like, I don't even know this person. Like, why do I feel this way? But it was this connection. And I really, the more we get to know each other, and here we are 10 years later, I really think there was a spiritual connection between our souls of coming together and how we came together. And I think I was feeling that. I really think it was like, oh my God, my soul was like, I haven't seen you in forever. Let's catch up. And to be able to keep that, we've always had long conversations. We've always made time for long conversations, even though life gets busy and chaotic and crazy.
And not even long, but deep.
Yeah.
There's a depth to our conversation,
and
right?
then the play and all that kind of came along as well. I'm going to say this the most rated PG that I can. The best foreplay
is to be connected at a soul level by actively listening to your partner and actually having them feel heard.
Mhm.
There is an intimacy level there that again can actually go past the just sexual intimacy.
Mhm.
It's such a deeper connection.
Yeah. We've had couples that have said, the wife has said, foreplay for me starts in the morning,
Yeah.
right? With great conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just
Women and
making
men.
us feel closer, right?
Yeah.
And then it leads to the best sexual intimacy that you
Yeah.
can possibly have within a relationship.
Yep.
Yeah.
No doubt. So I'm curious, we've been asking lots of questions, but
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you guys. Is there any question we haven't asked that you wish we would have, or something that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, you take
Turn
that
into
one.
me?
A burning desire to tell our audience
Right?
is
of what the do's and don'ts. Yeah. What were we just talking about the other day about the little things, the small details, right? And really, as far as relationships go and intimate, committed relationships, I think sometimes for a lot of people, the small details get overlooked or they get unappreciated. We were having conversations about, like, even hearing each other about the small things, like, I wish you would not squeeze the toothpaste at the top instead of the bottom, or right. And the different things that humans have as their own independent pet peeves, but listening to that for one another. And is it really that big of a deal to just do it for the other person? Right? It doesn't mean that you're like bending over and just not going to, okay, I just do whatever you say. It's doing it for the love of the person. Like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that was something, like, oh, it drives you nuts when I do, I leave my coffee cup here.
Comes
All
back
right.
to the commitment, right?
Yeah,
like we are committed
those
to being in a
small
loving
things.
relationship.
Yeah.
So
and so those little details matter, because those are the things that pile
Yeah,
up.
you got to sweat the small stuff, because when you're
Yeah.
loving and committed to somebody, that's part of the answer. And I think you guys have been fantastic today and open and sharing. We're so grateful to have had the conversation with you and get to know you a little bit better. If people want to find more out about Scott and Nancy and what you guys do, where should they go?
Well, exactly that. Just honestly Google Scott and Nancy. It'll take you to all of our, whether it's Facebook, our Instagram, our website, because everything is under Scott and Nancy Kiesling. So you can just put Scott and Nancy in there, and we're blessed enough that everything will come up where you'll get that. And you can reach out through any of those platforms to contact us if you have any questions.
Terrific.
Yeah.
You guys have been awesome. I'm so grateful for your authenticity and your really vulnerability today, talking about your background, and so grateful for all the work that you're doing in this same similar space and helping couples within relationships. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure.
Thank you. And then we always like to close by saying, that happily ever after does not just happen. It is on purpose. So thanks for being with us today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
That's all we've got for this episode of the Kickass Couples Podcast. If you like the content of this show, you'll love Matthew's newly released book, Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex. To receive a digital mini book of quotes and images from the book, all you have to do is rate this show and leave a review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen. Then email us a screenshot of your review at podcast@kickasscouplespodcast.com, and we'll get it over to you right away. Until next time, remember, happily ever after doesn't just happen, it's on purpose.